Hello, everyone. This is the Around the Big Ten report. Marc Givler here with Chip Minnich. Chip, first of all, welcome to the family. We appreciate your contributions over at Buckeye Huddle and now here on the Saturday Glory channel as well. We are going to do a new Around the Big Ten style podcast, which we will simulcast on both the Saturday Glory channel, which is a national college football channel, if you're not familiar, and on the Buckeye Huddle channel, so that Ohio State fans who are undoubtedly interested in the Big Ten goings on can follow along there as well. So wherever you catch us, appreciate it. Give us a like and subscribe on the video, or a follow on the podcast feed if you are listening in audio format. But Chip, let's just get right into it, because we're going to do our kind of a weekend recap here. UCLA, all of a sudden, this was something you really wanted to kind of talk about here. All of a sudden, UCLA, I mean, it was a disastrous start to UCLA's entrance into the Big Ten.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
I'm just excited to be welcomed to be part of the family, as you said. I'm excited to be working with you and all the other talented individuals, associated with Buckeye Huddle and Saturday Glory. So, UCLA, it couldn't have been worse. I mean, and I mean this with all due respect to Deshaun Foster. He was put into a very difficult situation. Let's just call it what it is, in the sense that coming in after Chip Kelly left, and when it came to the talent assessment, I'm not saying that Chip Kelly left the cupboard bare, but he was coming in after spring football kind of had already begun, and to his credit, Deshaun Foster never ever kind of wavered in his faith and determination that his program would become competitive. Now, it didn't look pretty. I know we're going to be talking about some of the other programs within the Big Ten on this session here. They were blasted by Indiana, for example, at home. It was looking pretty bleak, but the fact that they've won 3 in a row, now they're not out of the woods yet. I mean, let's face it, let's call it what it is. I mean, right now they're 4-5. They've got games remaining that they still need to get to that magic number of 6. But compared to where they were at the beginning of the season, I think Deshaun Foster deserves a well-deserved heaping of praise.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. They looked, I mean, this looked like this was going to be like a 3-win team at the beginning of the season. And you're getting blown out by Indiana, which has aged. I mean, it's still not a great performance. Obviously, you get killed at home by Indiana, but that's aging a little better, I think, than we all thought it would at the time. I think Indiana has certainly played above everyone's expectations so far, which we'll get into here in a few minutes. But I agree. I thought it was hard not to think after the first 5 games of the season, oh, what did UCLA do here? What a mistake. They have whiffed on the Chip Kelly replacement. This is terrible. They are going to lose 9-10 games. This is just a tailspin. And look, the Iowa game was an Iowa game. It was ugly at times. It was physical. It was disjointed, but that's a great win. I didn't think UCLA would be physical enough to win that game. I was very surprised. But they were the more physical football team, and that's actually happened to Iowa a couple times this year now, and it's interesting. But UCLA was able to really establish their ground game against Iowa, and they seem to have found some footing here. Now they finish. You got Washington, USC, and Fresno State to finish it out. It's kind of an interesting situation. I would call all 3 of those games winnable. I would call all 3 of those games losable. So how do you see this kind of finishing out for them?
Well, I think what's going to be, and you're more on the recruiting side, you and Kevin Noon, so I don't want to veer too far into your territory. The game that I think looms biggest, I'm not trying to, obviously you want to play them in the sequence that you just described. Obviously they want to win at Washington. Washington, as we know, has been hot and cold. We're going to talk about them momentarily as it relates to what they currently experienced. I think it is entirely possible that UCLA gets 2 out of the 3. I think what is going to be interesting, the reason why I brought up the recruiting side of things is that, and I think you would know this better than I do, rumor has it that Deshaun Foster, that his return to UCLA, his place of glory as a player, has reinvigorated the recruiting efforts for UCLA. And I think if they can win against USC, their longtime crosstown rival, and win against Fresno State, so now you've got bowl eligibility as well as probably momentum for a strong recruiting finish. So that's the way I see it. I think that they can go 2 out of 3. I mean, obviously, like you said, all 3 of them are winnable. All 3 of them are losable. But I would think that UCLA, the way that they've been playing recently, I think 2 out of 3 is not out of the question.
Yeah, I think that would be a big boost for them. They have done a good job. They've got Madden Iamaleava, Nico Iamaleava, Tennessee quarterback's younger brother, committed at quarterback. Jaden Hudson, another big-time defensive back prospect out of California, committed, a high 4-star kid. Weston Port, another California linebacker, highly rated kid. So they've got some guys in the class already. And so a little added proof of concept here down the stretch, I think would go a long way for them. They certainly seem to be in a place where if they can finish with a decent finish, that they could see this turning the corner type of moment for the program. Beginning of the year, I don't think anyone really knew what to expect out of Washington. So maybe not super surprising that they have a chance to beat Washington. I think even with the loss of Caleb Williams, I think it's almost surprising how winnable that USC game looks like it could be. And then obviously Fresno State's the one you got to kind of be alert for because they're capable of winning that game, but you got to show up and get it done because Fresno State can sneak up on you. So it'll be interesting to see how they finish. But I was super proud. Again, it was the way they did it. They beat Iowa at their own game. They were physical on both sides of the ball. They ran for a ton of yards. And really, Iowa, again, at the end of the game, Iowa couldn't get stops. They were able to run out the clock with both the running game and a little bit of play action stuff at the end of the game to kind of ice the game, where Iowa's vaunted, defense couldn't get a stop at the very end. So that was a really impressive win, and a really big deal, I think, for that program to get on this winning streak and move toward bowl eligibility. We talked about a big win now with UCLA. Here's my clunker of the weekend. Minnesota at Rutgers. PJ Fleck, who I personally think is a good coach. PJ Fleck is the Matt Campbell of the Big Ten. In the sense that just when you think, oh, he's got a really good team this year, he goes out and they drop 1 or 2 in a row to teams they shouldn't do it to. We're seeing it with Iowa State now this year. And Minnesota did it at Rutgers. You're on a roll. You're winning. You beat Illinois. Like, you're going to be ranked if you beat Rutgers. You're going to be ranked in the top 25 for the playoff committee. I mean, not that your playoff spots in reach that point, but still, you're going to be a ranked program, which is a good sell for your program on the recruiting trail. And just a total clunker to Rutgers, who I think was on a 4-game losing streak.
Yep.
Didn't have their starting running back. Were you shocked by that? Or maybe shocked. So it's not like Minnesota's Alabama, but it's like, man, like just when you thought they were really kind of rolling, it's just to me, that was a big egg to lay.
Yeah, the reason I'm smiling is, when just when you thought, like, it kind of reminds me of that tagline for, like with Jaws, like the movies, like just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water kind of a thing. But in all seriousness, kind of sticking to the football theme, absolutely, it was a surprise because Rutgers, let's face it, I was one of these people that before the season began, just looking at their schedule, I thought, okay, Rutgers is so well positioned to have a strong season. And then it just seemed like the bottom fell out, as you said, the fact that they were without their top running back, Rutgers on a losing streak, Minnesota on, I don't want to say a hot streak, but that they were playing well. I think Illinois has proved to be one of the better teams in the Big Ten in terms of, what they've demonstrated at times this year and the fact they were coming off that win. And I'm just going to say it that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of Ethan Kaliakmanis at quarterback. He hadn't really shown too much for Rutgers in the passing game. I realized that there's a history there, the fact that he was going up against his old team. However, my belief was that Minnesota certainly would have been the favorite to win that game. And congratulations to Greg Schiano. I think he's a really good coach. I think Rutgers, maybe that they've righted some of the issues that they were having, but now all it did is just kind of make you wonder, how good is Minnesota, because of the fact that they blew a game that most people believed that they were going to be able to handle easily.
Yeah, it's one of those losses like, okay, so Minnesota's not playing for a playoff spot at this point, but you are playing for some type of position. Like, there are things you can do if you're, at that point, if you're 6-3 Minnesota, whatever, there are things you can do that really can elevate your program. If you can go 8-4, 9-3, you're going to get into a much better bowl game. You're going to play a better opponent in that bowl game. Maybe a chance to punch up against like an SEC school. You're got a real good chance to finish ranked at that point. Which again, we're in a 12-team playoff field now. So being able to go to a high school family or a high school recruit's family and say, look, we finished 19th. We're just a few spots away from a playoff berth. And that's gonna be the big thing now, is not so much like, there's only 2 teams or there's 4 teams in the play. There's 12 teams in the play. So like, a lot of kids are gonna be looking for opportunities to go places they can play in playoff games. And so you could have finished this out in a way that would have made that very appealing, I think, to a lot of your recruiting targets. And it's just, I don't know. I don't know if it's complacency or, Rutgers is always kind of feisty under Schiano. They're physical. They're kind of a tough out, but that's just, you want to be a top 25 type of program. Those are the games you got to win. You're talking about what you have to do to, like, we always talk about like what Ohio State and Penn State and Michigan have to do to like compete with Alabama and Georgia. And this is just on a small, like, if you want to be a top 25 program, these are the types of games you have to win.
I think the way you hit it on the head is that, all right, you're trying to improve your bowl game situation. Let's face it. I mean, we're all novices in terms of what this is going to look like. I mean, I realize that with the college football playoff rankings that they come out every Tuesday evening, and we are still far from the final standings. That being said, Minnesota is one of those teams, like you said, that you want to improve your bowl game destination, because that can only help to improve your recruiting, the talent that you're bringing in. You can, like you said, you can try and sell to your prospective players, hey, we're that much closer. We're going to be one of those teams that's going to be in the 12 team. If you come on board, help our program get stronger. A loss like this, if anything, it just kind of sets you back and kind of makes you think that, all right, if you're one of those recruits that's kind of on the fence about, should I go to Minnesota or should I hold out hope for one of those teams that are in the 12-team playoff, it just kind of sets the program back, in my estimation.
Yeah. And now with like the portal, like a lot of these teams like Minnesota are going to have to be active in the transfer portal. If you can sell, like, man, we were this close to the play, like there are just so many things you can sell right now. If you're in that like 15 to 20 to 25 range in the rankings, like that's a lot of hopes and dreams you can sell, but you can't turn around and lose games to Rutgers once you start to win a few games in a row. So that was my kind of egg lay of the weekend. But another team that laid an egg, and they weren't expected to win this game, but I was surprised how quickly this one was over. And that was Penn State just dominated Washington. That was 28-0 at halftime. I mean, tough trip for Washington to make. We know they're kind of struggling right now, but like they just beat USC, right? Mm-hmm. So they've got some juice going, and Penn State, everyone's like, oh, that's gonna be a letdown for Penn State. You play that physical, tough, close loss to Ohio State. I'm sure Penn State fans and players certainly echoed it after the game. They felt they could have won that game. They didn't. Now you're coming back, you're staying at home, but you got Washington coming in. It's not super exciting. They're 5-4, whatever they were, but 28-0 at half. I mean, that game was over. Like it started and then it was over. Like if you were a non-Penn State fan, you turned that game off real soon. You turned that game off in the first half.
Yeah, and just to kind of not to add insult to injury, I know that Penn State fans, understandably, they were irritated. I mean, you were just talking about the Penn State Ohio State game, and okay, the fact that they felt that was a winnable game, that they were in it to the final moments, and they lost a game that they of all years they thought, okay, Ohio State's on the ropes, we've got them at home, we can do this. They lost. I mean, it was emotionally and physically draining. Well, another thing was, and you know this as well as I do, that Penn State fans were so angry at the fact that the Ohio State game wasn't their whiteout game. I mean, they've been wanting that and ever since the new Fox TV contract, or I should say the new media contract, the fact that Fox has been choosing the games like Penn State, Ohio State at for the noon game has been frustrating for them. Well, this is kind of tying the insult to injury aspect, is that, all right, so then Washington was their whiteout game. And oh, by the way, we're going to put it on Peacock. So like, it was kind of like, you've got to be kidding me. So like you said, it was one of these things where I think as just a college football fan, the fact that Penn State came back very strong, very determined, very focused. The game was, I completely agree with you, done at halftime. I think that speaks volumes about Penn State's resilience. I think, if anything, as an Ohio State fan, that Ohio State, you can't be looking over your shoulder because Penn State is there. I mean, the way that the schedule is setting up, and I know we're going to be talking about this, that Penn State is so well positioned to be one of those 12 member of the 12-team college football playoff. Getting back to Washington, I mean, it's just kind of like similar. We were just talking about with Minnesota. It's like, okay, you're thinking that, okay, maybe they've figured some things out. And I agree with you. I think the cross-country travel is much more of a factor than the average college football fan recognizes. And for all of the coaches trying to say, oh, we're going to keep everything the same and try and keep schedules similar, I think it's well-intentioned, but I think that there's still something to be said about having to fly across the country, let alone going into one of the most notoriously difficult college football stadiums around at night after the fans have been having a good time throughout the entire day. You know how loud it is. You know how difficult it is. So Washington, they've got to regroup, because we were just talking about with regards to UCLA trying to get to that magic number 6. Washington's in the same boat. They've got 5 wins right now. Maybe it might be a little easier for them because they're going to be hosting UCLA on Friday night as we're recording this. So maybe that's kind of where I was thinking when you asked me earlier about UCLA being able to win it. Yeah, certainly they can do that. But Washington, they can't sit and wallow in self-pity. They've got to regroup to try and get to that magic number of 6.
And Washington's in an interesting spot right now because there's pressure there to show, confirm, whatever, that this was not like all Kalen DeBoer, that this is a program that is not just tied to one coach. This is a sustainable program that can be a top flight program. And so there's similar pressure. Like it's ironic. Kalen DeBoer is kind of facing the same pressure at Alabama right now because he needs to get off to a good start so that Alabama doesn't lose their standing. But what he's left behind is a Washington program that needs to get off to a good start without him so that they don't lose their standing out west with recruits and just in the general college football landscape. So I thought, again, coming off the USC win, having this night game in Happy Valley, not necessarily win the game, but like show up. I mean, that game was over so fast. But credit to Penn State. They wanted to fire James Franklin a couple days ago, and his team bounced back. I think Penn State's really good. And I know there's not like the only evidence we really have to go off of right now is a close loss at home to Ohio State. And people are going to kind of spin that any way they want as far as, well, they couldn't beat Ohio State at home, so how good can they be? And it's not like they're loaded schedule-wise, like a bunch of these big wins. But just like eyeball test, like they play defense, they can run the ball. They're, yes, could their offense be a little more explosive? Yes. Are they limited at a wide receiver? Yes. But Tyler Warren's a difference maker. It didn't really look like it last week, but they've been getting, 2 weeks ago against Ohio State, but they've generally been getting improved quarterback play from Drew Aller than what they got last year. So I think this was a maybe a bigger statement win than people are taking or making it seem. I think this was an interesting win for their trajectory.
I agree. And a little side note, happy for Julian Fleming to finally score a touchdown as a member of Penn State. And he was one of those players that, I mean, he just seemed like he was just snake bit his career at Ohio State. Nothing against the young man. I wish him nothing but the best in his career at Penn State. But getting back to your point, I do think that this was important for the Penn State trajectory. Like, let's face it, when the Big Ten announced that they were going to dissolve the divisions, Penn State was the name or the team that was on the tip of Big Ten fans saying, like, okay, the biggest beneficiary of that should be Penn State, because having been in the same division for so many years with Ohio State, with Michigan, let's face it, Michigan State at times during the Marc D'Antonio era, I mean, it was one of these things where it's like, okay, that was a tough slog for anybody, but Penn State now should be well positioned to be in the 12-team college football playoff. I think James Franklin should get some credit for the fact that he didn't allow his team to wallow in self-pity. They were able to regroup. Again, they're not explosive offensively, but I completely agree with you. The strong running game, improved Drew Aller, and the defense is definitely going to be the kind of thing that's going to keep Penn State in contention when college football playoff time comes around.
Yeah. So again, good bounce back for them. You got to get that narrative out of there. You don't want all this negativity around your program after the Ohio State loss. At the end of the day, it was not a terrible loss. You lost to what is now the number 2 team in the country at home by a touchdown. Like, I know, like, look, James Franklin's had his issues in big games. No one's denying that, but you're still a team that's right there for a playoff spot and really for a playoff home game. And so you gotta flush that as quickly as possible. You got to get all the negativity out of there as quickly as possible. I think that was a good step for them there. Indiana beats Michigan, which was expected. I mean, I don't know what twilight zone we're living in where Indiana's a 2-touchdown favorite against Michigan, but that's the world we were in on Saturday. And it wasn't easy. At times it looked like they were going to blow it, but they were able to hold on and get a huge win. Chip, just, your thoughts watching that, and just on Indiana beating Michigan doesn't happen very often.
No, it doesn't. And I realize I'm showing my age. I'm not embarrassed but I remember back in the day, I was in high school when the then Ohio State head coach Earl Bruce, kind of like a dark day for Ohio State. Well, that year, Indiana was able to not only beat Ohio State decisively, but also beat Michigan. And the fact that, it was several years later, wasn't until the COVID season of 2020 that Indiana, and they, we were just talking about, Washington earlier with, Michael Penix that year, Indiana was good. I mean, they put a legitimate scare into Ohio State, but to your point, I think Indiana, I think Kirk Cignetti has done a tremendous job. Now, granted, he brought in a number of players that played for him previously at James Madison, and they mined the transfer portal extremely well. But to your point about what I saw, I think Indiana, they in the second half, let's give credit to Michigan's defense. They really clamped down and made it a lot more difficult for Indiana. But if anything, I think Indiana is certainly been, and deservedly so, the talk of college football as a resurgent team. I mean, nobody anticipated Kurt Cignetti being able to have Indiana, undefeated at this stage of the season. I think a lot of people, myself included, thought Indiana would be a bowl team, but I certainly did not anticipate them being a team that would be discussed as a possible Big Ten championship team.
As the cat makes an appearance, you'll see that. You'll probably see the dog make an appearance too at some point.
Okay.
So that's just the bonus coverage, the bonus content you get from this podcast. But yes, I agree. And one thing I'll add on that is I liked the way Indiana won the game, which is they had to kind of really fight for it. They kind of blew it at one point. It looked like they were going to blow it. They didn't. They fought back, and sure enough, pulled it out at the end. They've had a lot of easy wins, a lot of blowout wins. Their margin of victory has been insane. I think they've won like every game by 2 touchdowns. Mm-hmm. So I like that they had to dig down deep and come up with an ugly win. I think there's some value to that in the same way I thought there was value to that for Ohio State against Penn State a couple weeks ago, when Ohio State we all know Ohio State can do the pretty 7-on-7, basketball on grass type of thing. We know they can win. They can score 40, 45 points and do all that. Could they get into a defensive slugfest, kind of a slop fest with Penn State and win? And they did. And I think the same thing is true for Indiana. I think, this wasn't a track meet. This was an ugly game. It was not a pretty game to watch, especially like later. Like the first quarter was kind of entertaining, but then it got really, really ugly. And that you got to win those types of games sometimes, especially maybe in the playoff. You may get a playoff situation like that where you're in one of those like ugly, 14-10 games in the third or fourth quarter, and you've got to just come up with some stops or find a way. And so Indiana was able to do that. So good on them for that. Which leads right into our last thing here. Is it a lock that 4 Big Ten teams are going to make the college football playoff? Like, are Indiana, Penn State, Ohio State, and Oregon locks at this point for the playoff?
I would say so. I mean, I'm not a gambling man by nature, but I just look at the schedule and the way that it's set up. Now I realize, I mean, football is, it's a funny shaped ball that can sometimes take funny shaped bounces. And I'm not trying to be glib about it, but the reality is that we already know that, okay, Ohio State, you just referenced the fact that Ohio State had a gut check game a few weeks ago against Penn State. And I mean, they're coming off a dominant win against Purdue. They're heavily favored going on the road at Northwestern. And then they've got Indiana, and that kind of serves as an elimination game in my estimation, for either of those teams, because in the sense that Ohio State, if they were to lose to Indiana, they would have 2 losses within the Big Ten. For Indiana, the fact that, okay, yeah, they still have their rivalry game against Purdue, and we all know that rivalry games can go any variety of different ways, but Indiana will be heavily favored. But Indiana would have 1 loss to Ohio State. Penn State, we talked about the fact that the schedule sets up very nicely. Penn State, they finish up. They've got Purdue, they've got Minnesota. It's escaping me off the top of my head, like how they finish up. But my point being that I think, if you're Ohio State, you can't take your foot off the gas, because both of those teams probably at worst are going to have 1 loss. Now, granted, both of them to Ohio State. So I think it'll probably wind up Ohio State and Oregon for the Big Ten championship. But to your point, absolutely, I think that it's as close to a lock as possible. That if you're sitting there at Penn State with only 1 loss, Indiana with only 1 loss, I think 4 teams from the Big Ten for a 12-team playoffs certainly seems likely.
Yeah, I would very much be willing to bet that they get 4 in. You have to believe. To believe they're not going to get 4 in, you would almost have to believe that Indiana loses to Purdue. And I am not that. I hate to say this about a program, because I'm sure it's not the truth for like every kid in that program, but that looks like a team that's kind of like broken, and it's kind of like going to mail it in. It just does look to me like that. It doesn't look like a team that's going to like dig their heels in these last few weeks, but that was a defeated looking head coach after the Ohio State game on Saturday.
Well, I mean, and I apologize if this sounds, very harsh, but when I think of, what I recall watching that game from home, mind you, that when it came to Purdue, the fact that they were down and they were attempting field goals, that is, I mean, that to me is, and as much as I respect, Tom Orr, because I know how, he is well versed in, you're not going to be winning games by kicking field goals kind of a thing. The fact that they did that when they were down 45-0, I said to my wife at the time, I said that is just, I mean, you want to talk about a team that is basically quit. And granted, I was not under the delusion that, this is going to spark some kind of a crazy, return, that Purdue was going to all of a sudden be, coming back in this. But yeah, I completely agree. I think Purdue has quit, which speaks volumes about like you said, I think that the program is broken. Now, Purdue, I think they're going to stick with Ryan Walters another year because it's only been 2 years. But, I mean, you want to talk about a hot seat. I can't imagine anyone being on a hotter one than Ryan Walters going into year 3. And, yeah, I think Indiana, I mean, Curt Cignetti has not shown any lack of he certainly does not lack a killer instinct. I mean, like you said, they're used to blowing teams out. The fact that they had a gut check game against Michigan, I think positions them quite well. Now, granted, they have this week off, which, and that's kind of, if anything, if you're an Ohio State fan, that's kind of where Ohio State, okay, like don't mess around, take care of business at Northwestern and come back, because Indiana, they're going to be well rested and excited about the opportunity to go into Ohio Stadium and pull off an upset, but it should be a great game.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so confident that it's 4, is because Indiana's got 10 wins already. I mean, the hay is like in the barn for them. They just have to not lose to Purdue. Mm-hmm. And I think they're going to give Ohio State a really good game here in about 2 weeks, but that game almost doesn't. Now, don't tell Indiana this. They're going to think I'm crazy. But for their playoff chances, that game doesn't even really matter. Like they're going to get a mulligan on that from the committee if they lose to Ohio State. No one's going to fault them for losing at Ohio State. So they just have to beat Purdue to get in. And I just don't see this team with Cignetti and the way they've dominated most of the teams they've played be sitting there, even if they've lost to Ohio State, be sitting there the last week of the season thinking, all we have to do is beat Purdue and we're in the playoff, and then laying an egg. It's like unfathomable to me. So nor do I see Purdue, as currently constructed, rising up to that challenge to play spoiler. Again, as we've just discussed, that looks like a team that's just in shambles. So, I think it's 4. I think it's a lock. I think the better question is how many of them get home games, because we know one of them will get a bye. And then there will be 3 others in as at large teams. And I think it's possible we're sitting with 1 bye. I think it's possible we're sitting with number 1 overall seed, which is winner of Ohio State. Let's say Ohio State Oregon rematch. It's my prediction is Ohio State Oregon rematch, Big Ten championship. Winner gets the 1 seed. Loser of that, if it's Oregon, I think gets the 5. If it's Ohio State, I still think somewhere in that range of home games, somewhere in that top 8 to get home games. I think Penn State's going to get a home game. Would they give Indiana a home game?
I think they would. I really do. I really do. I mean, granted, we're a couple weeks out. I mean, if Ohio State went out and just completely, blasted Indiana, maybe. Because I think the national media. I know Joel Klatt referenced it in the Ohio State Purdue game about the lack of respect that Indiana is getting. They referenced that on the Fox broadcast. But yeah, I think if Indiana, to your point, I think they're going to get a mulligan, but I think it's kind of with like the small asterisk of, all right, if Ohio State takes them behind the woodshed, so to speak, that might change some things. I still think Indiana is getting in no matter what. I completely agree with you. It just depends. Like Ohio State, if Indiana gives Ohio State everything that they can handle, and Ohio State still comes out with a win, kind of like what the Ohio State Oregon game. It was a 1-point loss. That if Indiana comes away with that and they go out and they just destroy and dominate Purdue, absolutely, I think Indiana should get a home playoff game.
It's possible Indiana could lose to Ohio State in a way that actually wouldn't even drop them in the rankings.
I can see that
happening around the country. And if you look at the hesitancy to give Indiana maybe its full respect, if they go lose by a touchdown in Columbus in a couple of weeks, I could see a scenario where they don't move in the ranking, they don't drop.
Certainly. It's the kind of thing where I think Cignetti has certainly opened the eyes of the college football public. Obviously the media, they're starting to catch on the fact that, hey, the committee needs to be ranking these guys higher. Look at their, the fact that, how dominant they've been. So I completely agree with you. I think it's entirely possible that Indiana, if they play Ohio State, tough, which I anticipate. I'm not much of a gambler. I'm sure the gambling lines are going to be interesting to watch over these next couple of weeks. But I think Indiana certainly is going to give Ohio State all that they can handle. And if they come away impressing people on, I realize people are getting up in arms about this, the 12 p.m. Fox noon game, but a national television audience, I think that if anything, it just bolsters their case for them to be a college football playoff team. And like you said, to be a probable host for the first round.
Great spot for Indiana, though. They like very little to lose in that one. You got a bye week to get ready. You're going on the road. You're playing with house money, I think. I mean, there's very little out there. There aren't many outcomes on that Saturday that could really hurt them.
No, not at all.
6-0, okay, but like hurts them, but like that's not going to happen. Like they're in a situation where most of the outcomes are positive for them.
Oh, certainly. And let's not forget the fact, I know we're talking about Curt Cignetti and it's a new staff. And as we said, they brought in a number of players from the transfer portal, from James Madison and Curtis Rourke from Ohio U. And let's not forget Indiana, even when they were down, they would be a nuisance to Ohio State. I mean, it's not as though like Indiana was like, okay, like, Ohio State, yeah, they would win the game and they've won these games, but hey, Indiana, during the Kevin Wilson years, during the Tom Allen years, they were always the kind of thing. I mean, I'm sure Urban Meyer, if we were to give him some truth serum, I'm sure he would have some interesting comments about, like how frustrating it was when he was Ohio State's head coach. Didn't matter either in Columbus or going on the road. I can vividly recall, Ezekiel Elliott having to have, almost some heroic performances in Bloomington for Ohio State to kind of finish Indiana off. Now, again, we have the good fortune of Indiana coming to Ohio Stadium. My point being, though, is Indiana, even in years where they're supposed to be down, they've given Ohio State all that they can handle. And I think the fact that Indiana is undefeated, going to have a week off, and they're going to be primed for the 12 p.m. Fox noon, big noon game.
Yep, that'll be a big one for sure. And one at the beginning of the season maybe wouldn't have circled it, and now it's a huge game. It's one of the bigger games of the Big Ten season. So that'll do it for this one, guys. We appreciate everyone who's watching. We appreciate everyone who's going to listen to this in the audio feeds. Again, we'll have this up in the audio feeds as soon as possible on all the different platforms. But this will be up obviously on YouTube right away. So everyone can check us out there. And we'll be doing these. We're going to try and do these twice a week during the season and then maybe once a week during the off season. So look for maybe a weekly predictions episode as well later in the week where we kind of break down the upcoming games. This was kind of our weekend reaction version. So just kind of get everyone up to speed about what this is all going to be about. We're excited about doing this. It's fun to talk about the entire conference and not just one team or just not just the top two teams in a country or anything like that. So get down and talk about everyone in the league, hopefully throughout the show, throughout the week. So appreciate everyone watching and listening, and we will talk to you again soon.
Thank you.